Oromia 11.
Good morning again, everybody, and I'm very pleased to be here and excited to be here because for the longest, I have advocated for Oromo people. And one of the questions that I could not answer is what the Oromo people want. What's the road Oromo people see for Oromo people and for Ethiopians? I couldn't answer. Yes, as you introduced me, I am the executive director for Allah, Oromo Advocacy Organization. As Allah, our group know what we want, what the Oromo people we think want. But for a long time, we have asked Oromo political parties, what is your vision for Oromo people? Oromo vision, what the Oromo people want should be as A and B and C, simple as that. But for so long, we didn't have it. So what this roadmap does is, it gives you, the Oromo people, it gives the Oromo people as the leaders, as the majority, what the vision they have for Ethiopia. And we want the world to see, this is what we think the Ethiopia should move forward. It gives the Oromo people particularly to voice, to support the ideas you liked, and to oppose, to make this better, rather than working ourselves internally. So we're bringing this out to you, so you can participate. We're bringing this to the world, so the world knows that we actually care for Oromo just as much as every Ethiopians. This is the vision from Oromo perspective. We expect and we're waiting for others to do the same for themselves. We are not here to dictate what the Ugaden, what the Tigrayans, what the Command, what everybody wants. We are here as Oromo perspective. We expect Oromos to give their opinion. We hope, we urge, and we want to support the nations and nationalities within Ethiopia to have their vision for their own people. We are aspiring for democracy that is good for everybody. It's enough for everybody. And I want to thank you guys for being here.
Oromia 11.
My task here is to summarize the document that we titled The Oromo Perspective on Post-Prosperity Party Political Dispensation. Why are we issuing this document? The events in Ethiopia are changing rapidly. Everyone knows that. The situation is deteriorating precipitously, and the possibility of the collapse of authority in Addis Ababa and in the regional capitals, to use the expression used by the UN Under Secretary General for Political Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, is all too real. And the consequences of a collapse of authority in Addis Ababa, it's beyond imaginable. So we, in the World Oromo Congress, we promised our people that what guides our work is a strategic anticipation. Rather than reacting to events, we promised our people that we'll anticipate events, anticipate change, and then prescribe solutions that we think. We'll build scenarios. Now, we anticipated change that, given the gravity and the imminence of change in Ethiopia, we thought that it's incumbent upon us, the World Oromo Congress, to anticipate change and then shape change rather than being swept away by change that is unmanaged. It's in that spirit that we offer the roadmap for post-prosperity party political dispensation. Why is it needed? Our ideas are built around 4 observations. The first one is that 3 years ago, there was a moment of hope, moment of change, where we thought the demands of the long-standing demands of the Oromo people will be answered after the hopeful moment of change and restructuring. 3 years later, the rule of violence, extrajudicial killings, imprisonment, stifling of freedom and press have returned with vengeance. Once again, sham elections are used as a means to gain and keep power. The hoped-for transition 3 years ago has now given way to a dictatorship with fascistic tendencies. Number 2, afflicted by a brutal civil war, a collapsing economy, and a mismanaged diplomacy on the world stage, Ethiopia now exhibits signs of a failed state. If not a failed state, a failing state. The Ethiopian government has exhausted its capacity to govern and its competence to arrest the deteriorating situation. Third, because of a civil war that the Prosperity Party has unleashed against its citizens, the political and military leadership of Ethiopia now stands accused of committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and possibly genocide. I say that because the United States government is considering whether to designate what happened in Ethiopia as genocide or not. But even more ominously today, the language of politics in Ethiopia, the language politicians employ in Ethiopia, the language of exchange and negotiations in Ethiopia is the language that was used in Rwanda before the 1994 genocide. Fourth, under pressure from military losses, economic collapse, and political implosion, clouds of fin de regime or end of regime is gathering over Finfinne or Addis Ababa. And the repercussions of a more bloodshed and ultimately a state collapse for the Horn of Africa, for the neighbors of Ethiopia, for the entire Mediterranean basin, all the way to the borders of Europe, is a real possibility. While we see all of this happening, it would be a failure for us not to prepare our people for the change that is to come. So what do we want to do? What do we want to change? We believe that war has ravaged, or a genocidal war has been waged against the Oromo, Tigray, Kemant, Agaw, Benishangul, Gumuz, and others. The formula of self-rule in the regions and the shared rule in the center, established by the 1991 settlement, is no longer tenable. The relationship between regions and the center must be redefined after the war, that is. Second, whether the war ends through a victory of one side or through a negotiated settlement, it is all too clear today that Ethiopia's multifaceted political problems cannot be resolved militarily or militarily alone. The more the Ethiopian authorities escalate the war, the greater the certainty of implosion of authority in Finfinne. Third, our observation, historical observation of moments of political transition in Ethiopia suggested to us another round of betrayal is in the making. And we don't imagine the Prosperity Party political dispensation and offer a roadmap that would guide our nation to exercising the inviolable, unbridgeable, and non-derogable right to self-determination. That time has come. That right has been in the books. That right has been in the Ethiopian constitution, but is never exercised. It looks like after all of this war that the time for exercising that right and living under a government that the Oromo people and other nations and nationalities chose is imminent. And fourth, Ethiopian politicians and international stakeholders seem to have put their faith in the inclusive national dialogue that will establish an all-inclusive transitional government. That eventuality is inescapable. Whether the war ends with a victory or the triumph of one side, or through a negotiated settlement, a negotiated political future is inevitable. It's inescapable. That cannot be avoided. So having determined that the roadmap of the present morass, out of the present political morass, is unavoidable, the Executive Committee of the World Oromo Congress, by powers vested in it by its constitution under Article 12G 1 and 2, has decided to issue this roadmap. As has been said, let's be clear about this roadmap. What we are issuing is a roadmap. It's not the roadmap. There are many competing roadmaps, but this will start a conversation about the future. We are trying to stay ahead of change because change that is unmanaged could be dangerous. We're trying to stay ahead. That's what we're all trying to do. So the purpose of this roadmap is simply to kick off an Oromo national conversation that would lead to a consensus about the future and a conversation with nations and nationalities in Ethiopia. So our objectives, we have objectives here, and there are several objectives. Our objectives that led to the development of this roadmap are, number one, the present struggle. The present Oromo struggle, characterized by war crimes and ethnic cleansing and possibly genocide, has revealed the true nature of the Ethiopian state. What we thought, the brutality, the cruelty that we thought had simply been forgotten, now that belongs to history, is not dead. The brutality that we thought was in the past now proved to be alive and well. The last 3 years that shown us the capacity and the willingness of the Ethiopian state to wage a war against its own people. Second, the right of self-determination up to and including secession is the bedrock of all fundamental human rights, and it's the organizing principle of the Ethiopian Constitution of 1995. And as such, the people's right to exercise this right of self-determination, the right to enjoy their decision, is an inviolable right. It's unbridgeable right, and it's non-derogable right, and that we want to emphasize that it's our goal that our people and other nations and nationalities in Ethiopia exercise that right. Third, the Ethiopian state must be restructured after a war that I just described, after persecution, unprecedented persecution based on your identity, which is unfolding today in Ethiopia. After all of this, the Ethiopian state must be restructured. Its capacity to make war against its own citizens must be limited. So, including a new relationship between nations and nationalities, between the states, that must be redefined. It's impossible for us to imagine continuing under the centralized power where they could simply wage war against their own citizens, bring the technologies of neighboring countries and the soldiers from another country to wage war against your own citizen is untenable. Fourth, we had a transition before, but that transition did not involve a transitional justice. Now, a system of transitional justice and accountability measures to bring officials that have perpetrated, organized, and executed a plan to wage war, to commit war crimes, they must be held accountable. That must be instituted. That's our objective. And fifthly, we must end the politics introduced by the Prosperity Party, the modus operandi of the Prosperity Party, the militarization of politics and the commercialization of politics to ensure the supremacy of a single person. That kind of politics must also end. So, finally, we must protect the people's fundamental rights to peace, right to existence, right to physical security, and in general, all the agreed upon principles of human rights that people around the world enjoy, would be the basis that will guide the next dispensation in Ethiopia, the next political dispensation in Ethiopia. So in putting together a roadmap, we considered several scenarios of how to end the war, and we chose a scenario by which the war ends through a negotiated settlement. Just choosing a scenario, looking at situations today. We don't know what happens tomorrow, but based on that situation that we observe today, we chose a scenario in which this war ends through a negotiated settlement. So in this respect, we proposed a three-phase process of negotiations that would lead to a cessation of conflict, to negotiated end, and to an agreement to convene a national dialogue forum where the future of the country will be discussed. The goal is to put in place a transitional charter, transitional government in the regions and in the center, national reconciliation, and an agreement that would restructure the Ethiopian state. So what we're proposing is a simultaneous, the document, you will read in the document, what we're proposing is a simultaneous or multiple transitions in Ethiopia. One at the regional level, another at the federal level. These are concurrent processes. It is not happening in tandem. These are concurrent processes that happen at the regional level in Oromia and other places, depending on the roadmap other nations and nationalities develop for themselves. But our vision is that there will be a concurrent process. Our Oromo perspective on the post-prosperity political dispensation is that to secure Oromia and simultaneously ensure the shape and functions of the federal government. From our perspective, none of the Oromo people's demands, the historic and long-standing Oromo people's demands, can be achieved without attaining secure control over Oromia's physical space and making the Oromia regional government serve the national interest, the Oromo national interest. Unless Oromia is secured, it is impossible to protect our people, to protect our rights, and to protect our land. Second, unless Oromia stands on its own feet, it cannot negotiate, bargain, or enter into a new political agreement with other regional governments with a view to authoring a new political community in Ethiopia. So securing Oromia begins by establishing an interim caretaker government that would step in case of collapse of authority or the existing authority and a political vacuum that might happen. This caretaker government is mandated to carry out routine state functions and provide services, maintain law and order, sustain the safety, security, and well-being of citizens. This happens in two stages. The first one is the interim or provisional government that will fill the political vacuum that a collapse of authority creates. The interim government, the primary focus of the interim government is to fill that void, but focus on two things. First, the security of our people. Second, so that people continue to function within that state. It also discharges the routine duties of any government. After 6 months, this will be replaced in Oromia by a transitional national government of Oromia. And the transitional national government would be an all-inclusive of checks and balance, but its primary duty is first to carry out the major functions of the state, and secondly, it is also to create in Oromia a public space that is open and accessible to all the Oromo people, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, and economic and social origin status. So the public space will be the foundation for launching the Oromo people's right to exercise their right to self-determination. So that two functions. I do not have to list what the functions are. We will read it from the text, but The Oromia National Transitional Government is entrusted with two major tasks. That is to ensure that the government continues to provide public service. And second, to have a space, a political space where people discuss so that they prepare themselves for exercising their non-derogable right. The second is, this is Oromia, the simultaneous process is, and I'll summarize that and I'll end this one. Now, Ethiopia now meets the criteria for being categorized as a deeply divided society. And as such, it needs the international community's involvement to end the civil war using any means necessary, including invoking the responsibility to protect doctrine to protect citizens from atrocities committed by their government. On our part, we propose a program that is appropriate for a deeply divided society such as Ethiopia. The process has 3 stages, but we're focusing only on 2 stages. The first stage, and I'm talking about the federal government or the federal states, the emergency phase is to build confidence and to stabilize the society in order to pave the way for the negotiated end of the civil war and convene a national dialogue forum to write a transitional charter that guides the period of the transition. In our proposal, we only describe the activities, and this is important, we only describe the activities that must be undertaken during the transitional period. We do not make any suggestions as far as which institution implements the program. What should be clear is that the transitional authority, and I'm not saying what that would be because we're not getting there. The transitional authority is entrusted with 3 main responsibilities that would lead the transition. The federal government, just like the regional government, is entrusted with the responsibility to deliver routine government services to the public, to restructure and transform the state in accordance with the transitional charter, and third, prepare the country and its citizens for the exercise of their democratic rights, principally the right to self-determination. So overall, the transitional phase is intended to implement a political settlement that emanates from the all-inclusive national dialogue. Conceptually, the transition rests on 5 pillars: security, justice or transitional justice, economic development or socioeconomic development. This cannot wait even the period of transition. A political transition, what must be done to restructure the state, and human rights, justice, and reconciliation. So the activities of the transitional period is listed under these 5 categories. So again, there is no prescription in what we're doing here. What we are simply offering is we do not assume what the federal government is going to be. It could be a return to the status quo ante. It could be a reformed multinational federal state. It could be a confederation, as some nations and nationalities are now talking about. It could even be a commonwealth of independent states. We don't know what will happen. That will come out of negotiations. So we don't go to the development area, so we stop at these two stages. And any suggestion is welcome. We want to simply kick off a discussion, a national conversation amongst the Oromo themselves and with others.
Oromia 11.
Press briefing, World Oromo Congress. Ethiopia is in the midst of a civil war that commenced when the incumbent Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared war on the Prosperity Party's political opponents in Oromia and Tigray. The war has plunged the country in multiple crises that seem to defy solution. The national political discourse is saturated with dehumanizing rhetoric and hate-mongering speeches that is reminiscent of the period preceding the 1994 Rwanda genocide. The incumbent has exhausted its capacity for governance and the competence to arrest the deteriorating situation in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is on the verge of implosion, the consequence of which would prove to be cataclysmic for the country and for the region. We at the World Oromo Congress believe that the situation requires taking steps to arrest the imminent collapse of authority. It's time for stakeholders in Ethiopia to begin a political process that can lead to a national dialogue, accommodation of grievances, and a democratic transition for the current state of genocidal wars and despotic rule at all-inclusive, accountable, and democratic governance. This requires a commitment of all parties to a dialogue that produces carefully crafted steps to effect a smooth transition to a lasting peace and sustainable democracy. Hence, the World Oromo Congress proposes a perspective on a roadmap to guide the process from current civil war to a new political settlement. The document proposes steps of de-escalation, negotiation, and political settlement. It also envisages simultaneous transition for Oromia and Ethiopia, beginning with the establishment of interim government, followed by an all-inclusive transitional government for Oromia. At the same time, it offers a sequence of measures to be taken at the federal level in a way that works for a deeply divided society such as Ethiopia. This includes a three-phase program to end of war, relax the pervasive political tension, reopen the political space, and conduct a national dialogue that charts a program for the period of transition, including a transitional government charter. We believe our roadmap is an Oromo perspective, not the Oromo perspective. We are cognizant that the nations and nationalities will propose their own vision for post-Abiy Ethiopia and join hands with the Oromo people for a comprehensive national deliberation that paves the way for a negotiated political settlement through a transitional arrangement. We also remind Abiy Ahmed and his Prosperity Party that the genocidal wars they started have failed. The ill-advised civil war they started has already changed Ethiopia forever. Further escalation could easily reel out of control into the war of all against all. Continuing such a war serves no political purpose. Finally, we would like to call upon the international community to heed their commitment of never again and translate their expression of concern into action. If the crisis is allowed to fester, it's bound to exacerbate the humanitarian disaster. Now is the time to act. November 14, 2021, Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States of America, the World Oromo Congress. Thank you. Galatoma.
Oromia 11